The quiet hum of the Rolls-Royce engines on the Airbus A350 was a lullaby for the privileged a six-figure sound that promised champagne wishes and caviar dreams. In seat 1A of Transatlantic Air's most exclusive first-class cabin, a woman sat poised the world outside her triple-glazed window, a blur of clouds and sky. To the flight attendant, she was just another passenger. An anonymous face. A problem. In 5 minutes, that flight attendant, her bosses, and the entire multi-million-dollar company they worked for would learn her name. And they would learn it at the exact same moment they lost everything. This isn't just a story about bad service. It's about a quiet war fought at 35,000 feet, where a single email became a weapon of mass corporate destruction. Dr. Evelyn Reed believed that the most precious commodity in the modern world wasn't money or power, but anonymity. As the founder and CEO of Aurasphere Global, a logistics and procurement behemoth with a portfolio that quietly touched nearly every major industry, anonymity was a luxury her $4.2 billion net worth could rarely afford. On the ground, she was a figure of intense speculation in the financial press, a ghost who moved markets. In the air, however, she could just be Evelyn. Today she was just Evelyn, a tired woman in a tailored but comfortable cashmere travel suit, flying from New York's JFK to London Heathrow for a deal that would reshape the European energy sector. Flight TA-101 was her sanctuary, a 10-hour bubble of disconnection. The first-class suite, with its lie-flat bed, polished burled wood and personal minibar, was less an indulgence and more a necessity, a place to decompress before the corporate battle that awaited her in London. She had settled in her reading glasses, perched on her nose, as she reviewed a dense prospectus on her tablet. The lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin introduced herself with a practiced plastic smile. Her name tag read, Brenda. She was a woman in her late 40s, with a severe blonde bob that looked as rigid as her posture. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," Brenda said, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan of Evelyn's simple attire. The scan was an act of categorization Evelyn had seen 1,000 times. No flashy designer logos, no dripping jewelry. Conclusion: probably got an upgrade, not a regular. "Thank you, Brenda. It's lovely to be here," Evelyn replied, her voice calm and low, not looking up from her tablet. The pre-flight rituals unfolded. A glass of Dom Perignon was offered and accepted. A small bowl of warm, salted nuts was placed on her console table. Evelyn felt the familiar rumble as the aircraft pushed back from the gate, the gentle giant beginning its slow, deliberate journey to the runway. The safety video played a symphony of choreographed smiles and buckling seatbelts. Evelyn had it memorized. As they climbed through the bruised twilight of the New York sky, leveling out into the vast, dark emptiness over the Atlantic, the cabin lights softened to a gentle ambient glow. The scent of food began to waft from the galley, the promise of the culinary experience that airlines sold as the pinnacle of luxury travel. Brenda returned her order pad in hand. "Ma'am, have you had a chance to look at our dinner menu?" Evelyn had. She always pre-ordered to avoid any fuss. "Yes, thank you. I believe I pre-selected the pan-seared Atlantic salmon." Brenda tapped her tablet with a long acrylic fingernail. Her brow furrowed slightly. "The salmon. Right. Let me just double-check our manifest." She disappeared into the galley. A moment of quiet passed. Evelyn watched the flight map on her screen, a tiny digital plane inching its way across a vast blue ocean. She was looking forward to the meal. It was a small thing, but after a 14-hour day of back-to-back meetings, a simple, well-cooked piece of fish was a welcome comfort. Brenda returned her smile, now gone replaced by a tight, thin line. "I'm so sorry," she began, her tone laced with a saccharine condescension that set Evelyn's teeth on edge. "It seems we've run out of the salmon." The catering load was shortened. Evelyn felt a flicker of annoyance, but kept her expression neutral. "Oh, that's unusual for a pre-order. Is the sea bass available?" Brenda shook her head a little too quickly. "No. All the fish options are gone. It's been very popular tonight." She gestured vaguely at the other 3 occupied suites in the 12-seat cabin. "I can, however, offer you the grilled chicken breast. Or," she paused, her voice dropping as if sharing a secret, "I could probably get you the beef lasagna from premium economy. It's actually quite good." The suggestion hung in the air, thick and insulting. Offering a meal from a lower-class cabin was not a gesture of kindness. It was a reclassification. It was a subtle but clear message. You are not entitled to what the others have. Evelyn looked at Brenda, truly looked at her for the first time. She saw the hard-set eyes, the faint curl of a sneer on her lips. This wasn't about salmon. It was about something else entirely. "No, thank you," Evelyn said, her voice remaining perfectly level. "I would like one of the first-class entrees that are available. What besides the chicken was catered for this cabin?" Brenda sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation. "As I said, the fish is gone. There's the chicken, or a mushroom risotto." "The risotto then, please," Evelyn said, turning her attention back to her tablet, a clear dismissal. But Brenda didn't move. She lingered, a sour presence in the periphery. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper for future reference, "pre-ordering doesn't guarantee the meal. It just gives us a heads-up on preference. It's all subject to availability." It was a lie, and they both knew it. A confirmed, pre-selected meal in international first class was a contractual obligation. It was loaded specifically for that passenger. For it to be unavailable meant one of 2 things: gross incompetence by the catering company, or the meal had been given to someone else. Evelyn looked over the rim of her glasses. Across the aisle in Suite 1D, a well-known tech billionaire, a flamboyant man named Carter Finch, was laughing loudly with another flight attendant as a plate was placed before him. On it, gleaming under the soft cabin light, was a perfectly cooked fillet of pan-seared Atlantic salmon. Evelyn's gaze shifted back to Brenda, her eyes calm, but now holding a glint of steel. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The lie had been laid bare on a porcelain plate just 20 feet away. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. She had been caught. Instead of apologizing, she doubled down on her hostility. "The risotto will be out shortly," she snapped, before turning on her heel and marching back to the galley with an indignant stiffness. Evelyn watched her go. The fragile piece of her sanctuary had been shattered. It was no longer about a meal. It was about a principle. And Dr. Evelyn Reed was a woman who lived and died by principles. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, the cold bubbles doing nothing to quell the quiet, calculated anger now crystallizing in her mind. She glanced at the clock on her screen. 10:15 p.m. Eastern Time. The gears were already turning. The first-class cabin of a transatlantic flight is a theater of unspoken rules. Discretion is paramount. Confrontation is vulgar. Evelyn Reed understood this better than anyone. A public scene would accomplish nothing but a few moments of crude satisfaction, and Evelyn was not a crude woman. Her power was not in her voice, but in her reach. A younger businessman in seat 2A, a man named Kyle, who had been surreptitiously watching the exchange, leaned forward with a sympathetic look. "That was out of line," he murmured, loud enough only for Evelyn to hear. "You should report her." Evelyn gave him a small, appreciative nod. "Thank you. I intend to." Her risotto arrived 10 minutes later, delivered not by Brenda, but by a younger, nervous-looking flight attendant who placed it on her table with a muttered apology and scurried away. The dish was bland, overcooked, and congealed an insult in risotto form. Evelyn took one bite and pushed the plate away. She wasn't hungry anymore. Instead, she opened her laptop. The in-flight Wi-Fi, usually a sluggish and frustrating affair, connected with surprising speed. She opened her encrypted email client, the portal to her global empire. The cursor blinked on a blank screen, a single steady pulse. What was happening here was a symptom of a much larger disease. Aurasphere Global, her company was built on the unshakable pillars of precision, reliability, and zero tolerance for failure. They managed supply chains for governments, sourced critical components for tech giants, and procured services for Fortune 500 companies. Their entire business model was a promise: what you are promised you will receive. No exceptions, no excuses. And one of their many clients was Transatlantic Air. Aurasphere didn't just book flights for its executives. Through one of its subsidiaries, Vantage Procurement Solutions, they managed Transatlantic's entire global catering contract. It was a massive, complex $150 million per year deal that encompassed everything from the sourcing of cashews for the economy cabin to the selection of vintage wines for first class. The company responsible for that contract, the company whose food was served on this flight, was Global Fare Airways Catering. Evelyn knew the CEO of Global Fare, a man named Mark Thompson. They had met once at a contract signing. Thompson was an arrogant, glad-handing executive who spoke in buzzwords and radiated a smarmy self-satisfaction. He had personally assured Evelyn of his company's commitment to a paradigm of excellence. Excellence. Evelyn looked at the sad beige plate of risotto. She thought of Brenda's sneering face, the lie about the salmon, the blatant disrespect. This was not a simple service failure. This was a reflection of the company's culture from the top down, a culture of carelessness, of cutting corners, of treating contractual obligations as mere suggestions, and a culture of allowing employees like Brenda to act on their worst impulses without fear of repercussion. It was the kind of rot that Evelyn specialized in exercising. She began to type. Her fingers moved with a calm, steady rhythm across the keyboard. It was not a long email. It was brutally efficient. To Daniel Petrov, COO, Aurasphere Global. Mariah Flores, General Counsel, Aurasphere Global. CC, her personal executive assistant. Subject: urgent contract termination. Global Fare Airways Catering. Daniel Maria. Effective: immediately initiate termination proceedings for Aurasphere's master procurement contract with Transatlantic Air on behalf of Global Fare Airways Catering. Contract Ref GFA TAA 77B. Site breach of contract clause or for 3. Failure to meet service level agreements and clause 19.1 actions detrimental to client brand integrity. I am currently on TA 101 JFK ELHR. The service and product delivery in the premium cabin has been egregiously substandard, culminating in a direct and discriminatory breach of passenger service protocol by the cabin crew, reflective of a systemic failure within the vendor's operational standards. A pre-confirmed meal service was denied and given to another passenger, followed by a demonstrably false explanation from the staff. This is a zero-tolerance issue. I want their assets off-ramped from all transatlantic galleys by the end of the fiscal quarter. Have our contingency vendor, First Fleet Gastronomy, on standby to submit a transition proposal by market open tomorrow. I expect a draft of the termination notice in my inbox before I land in London. No further discussion is required. Regards, Dr. Evelyn Reed, CEO Aurasphere Global, sent from 35,000 feet. She read it over once. It was cold. It was clinical. It was a death sentence for a $150 million contract delivered via satellite. She hit send. The email sent notification popped up, a quiet chime that was for Global Fair Airways catering the sound of the apocalypse. Evelyn closed her laptop. She took another sip of champagne. Across the aisle, Carter Finch was finishing his salmon, blissfully unaware of the corporate drama he had inadvertently catalyzed. Brenda walked past her suite, studiously avoiding eye contact. In her mind, she had won. She had put the woman in 1A in her place. She had asserted her little sliver of authority in the aluminum tube, hurtling through the stratosphere. She had no idea that the quiet woman she had disrespected had just launched a nuclear warhead, and the fallout was already racing towards her. Her airline and her catering supplier at the speed of light. The time on Evelyn's screen read 10:20 p.m. Exactly 5 minutes had passed since Brenda had lied to her face. For the next 20 minutes, an artificial calm settled over the cabin. The lights were dimmed further, and most passengers were settling in to watch movies or sleep. Evelyn tried to return to her prospectus, but her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't angry anymore. She was in execution mode. Her email would have already landed in the inboxes of her two most trusted executives. Daniel, her COO, would be mobilizing his team, pulling up the contract clauses she'd cited. Maria, her top lawyer, would already be drafting the precise, merciless legal language required to sever the relationship. The first sign that her message had hit its target came not from the internet, but from the aircraft itself. A soft two-tone chime echoed through the cabin, the kind passengers rarely hear. It was the sound of an incoming ACARS message for the flight crew. ACARS, the aircraft communications, addressing and reporting system, is a text-based digital link between the aircraft and the airline's ground operations. It's used for flight plans, weather updates, and on rare occasions, urgent operational messages. The head purser, a distinguished-looking man named Arthur Kensington, emerged from the front galley. He had been largely invisible during the meal service, managing the larger crew. He now wore a look of deep concern. He walked directly to Brenda, who was collecting dessert plates, and spoke to her in a low, urgent whisper. Evelyn couldn't hear the words, but she could see the effect they had on Brenda. Her face, already taut with resentment, went slack with confusion, then pale with alarm. She looked from Arthur to Evelyn, her eyes wide. Arthur then approached Evelyn's suite. He was the picture of professionalism, his posture immaculate, his voice a smooth, apologetic baritone. Dr. Reed. My apologies for the disturbance. I am Arthur Kensington, the customer service manager for this flight. He used her title. That was the first confirmation. Someone on the ground had already connected the dots. Yes, Arthur, Evelyn said, her tone inviting but neutral. Ma'am, we've just received a rather unusual message from our operations center in New York, he said, choosing his words with extreme care. They've asked me to personally verify your identity and to inquire if you have experienced any issues with our onboard service this evening. He was in an impossible position. The message he received was likely a frantic all-caps demand from a terrified vice president on the ground, but he had to present it with an air of calm routine. My identity is as it appears on the manifest, Evelyn replied calmly. And yes, there have been some issues. Your colleague Brenda may be able to provide you with the details from her perspective. Arthur's gaze flickered towards Brenda, who was now standing frozen by the galley curtain, looking like a statue of pure panic. He knew. He didn't know the full extent of it, but he knew this was far more serious than a complaint about a cold meal. Dr. Reed, Arthur said, his voice dropping even lower. On behalf of Transatlantic Air, please allow me to offer my most profound apologies for any lapse in service. Is there anything at all I can do to rectify the situation for you now? This was the critical moment. He was offering to fix the problem within the confines of the aircraft. A bottle of vintage wine from the Special Reserve, 1,000 apologies, a promise to discipline the crew member. But the missile was already in the air. The decision had been made and executed. This was no longer about rectifying a single flight service. It was about eradicating the systemic failure that allowed it to happen. Arthur. Evelyn said, her voice softening slightly. She respected his professionalism. He was a man trying to do his job in the middle of a corporate hurricane he didn't create. You have been nothing but courteous. The issue, however, is no longer under your control. Or mine, for that matter. The situation is being handled. The finality in her tone was unmistakable. It's over. Arthur's face, already strained, seemed to age 5 years. He understood. This was not a customer complaint. This was a verdict. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible bow of his head. I understand, Dr. Reed. Please, if you require anything at all for the remainder of your flight, do not hesitate to ask for me personally. He retreated, walking back to the galley where he pulled a stunned Brenda behind the curtain. The hushed, frantic conversation that followed was inaudible, but the tension was a palpable thing, a static charge in the air of the hushed cabin. The young businessman Kyle in 2A was staring, his mouth slightly agape. He had witnessed the initial petty insult. Now he was seeing the bizarre high-level fallout, the purser being summoned by a message from the ground, the terrified look on the flight attendant's face, the quiet, unshakable authority of the woman in 1A. He had no idea who she was, but he knew he was witnessing something extraordinary. He discreetly pulled out his phone, angled it away from the crew, and began typing a note to himself, determined to remember every detail. Evelyn, for her part, put on her noise-cancelling headphones, selected a calming playlist of cello suites, and reclined her seat. The operational fallout was now in Daniel's and Maria's capable hands. Her part in the execution was done. For the next 7 hours, she would try to find the peace she had originally sought. But for Brenda, the peace was gone forever. For the rest of the flight, she was a ghost. She performed her basic duties with trembling hands, her face a mask of ashen terror. Every time she passed seat 1A, she averted her eyes, flinching as if expecting a blow. The power dynamic in the cabin had been inverted with the force of a tectonic shift. The anonymous woman in the cashmere suit was no longer a target for her disdain. She was the architect of her doom, and Brenda was trapped at 35,000 feet with her. While the drama unfolded in the quiet darkness over the Atlantic, it was 10:25 p.m. in New York City. In his sleek Manhattan corner office, Mark Thompson, the regional CEO for Global Fair Airways Catering, was packing his briefcase. It had been a good day. He'd schmoozed a potential new client over a 3-hour lunch, signed off on a quarterly report that creatively hid some rising supply costs, and was looking forward to a weekend at his house in the Hamptons. His corporate cell phone buzzed. It was Franklin Hayes, the Executive Vice President of In-Flight Services for Transatlantic Air. A call from Franklin at this hour was never good news. Mark Franklin's voice was tight, strained. "We have a 5-alarm fire." Mark rolled his eyes. Franklin was prone to hyperbole. "Frank, relax. What is it this time? Did a bread roll on the Shanghai flight not have enough sesame seeds?" "I'm not joking, Mark. We just got off an emergency call with Aurasphere Global." The name sent a jolt through Mark's system. Aurasphere wasn't just a client. They were the gatekeeper. Their procurement contract was the reason Global Fair had the transatlantic account in the first place. What about them? Their COO, Daniel Petrov, called me directly. In my personal cell, he informed me in no uncertain terms that they are invoking Clause 19(1) and terminating your contract for the entire airline, globally. Mark dropped his briefcase. The sound echoed in the silent office. What, that's insane. That's a $150 million contract. On what grounds they need cause? We have an ironclad agreement. The cause. Mark is happening right now on flight TA-101 to Heathrow. Franklin's voice was laced with ice. The CEO of Aurasphere, Dr. Evelyn Reed, is in seat 1A. And your people, your catering, apparently created a situation so bad that she fired your entire company from 35,000 feet. Mark stumbled into his chair, his mind reeling. Evelyn Reed. He remembered her from the signing. Quiet, intense, didn't say much, but her eyes missed nothing. He had dismissed her as a typical detached executive, a fatal miscalculation. What happened? What could possibly have happened? He stammered. The initial report is a service denial, a pre-ordered first-class meal. Your meal. The flight crew is involved, but the termination notice is being filed against Global Fare for systemic failure. Petrov said, and I quote, "This is not the flight attendant's failure alone. It is the failure of the company whose product and protocol she represents." Mark's mind raced. A meal. They were losing the biggest contract in their portfolio over a meal. It had to be the salmon. He knew they'd been having supply chain issues with the Norwegian salmon supplier. His operations team had been flagging it for weeks. To save costs, he had told them to substitute with a cheaper, less reliable source for a month to pad the quarterly numbers. He had gambled that no one important would notice. He had gambled and lost the entire company. "Get me the flight manifest," Mark barked at his assistant over the intercom, his hands shaking. "I need the catering load sheet for TA-101. Now, and get the JFK duty manager on the phone." The information came in, trickles each piece worse than the last. The manifest confirmed Dr. Evelyn Reed in 1A. The catering sheet showed that only 4 Atlantic salmon meals had been loaded for a first-class cabin, with 5 confirmed pre-orders. 1 was shorted, his cost-cutting right there in black and white, a direct, clear breach of their service-level agreement. The JFK duty manager's report was even more damning. The flight attendant, Brenda, had a history of minor passenger complaints, mostly citing her abrasive attitude. She had been passed over for promotion twice. She was exactly the kind of resentful, bitter employee who would turn a simple stock issue into a personal confrontation. Mark saw the whole chain of events with sickening clarity. His decision to cut corners on the salmon led to a shortage. The shortage was handled with catastrophic incompetence by a disgruntled flight attendant. And the passenger on the receiving end wasn't a vacationing tourist. It was the one person on the planet who could sever their business relationship with a single keystroke. "This is a misunderstanding," Frank Mark pleaded into the phone, his voice slick with desperation. "I can fix this. I'll call Dr. Reed personally. I'll fly to London. I'll meet her at the airport with a 5-star chef and a truckload of salmon if I have to." Franklin Hayes laughed a short, ugly, humorless sound. "You don't get it, do you, Mark? This isn't about you. This is about Aurasphere. Their entire brand is built on flawless execution. You didn't just fail to deliver a meal. You made their CEO, their brand, personified a victim of shoddy logistics. You embarrassed them. You don't get to fix this. You're just the guy who gets to explain to your board of directors why the company's stock is about to fall off a cliff." The line went dead. Mark Thompson stared at his phone. The city lights of Manhattan twinkled outside his window, a glittering tapestry of commerce and power. For years he had felt like he was at the center of it all. Now he just felt like a man in a tall building, waiting for the floor to drop out from under him. He had thought he was in the business of food. He had just learned he was in the business of precision, and he had failed the ultimate inspection. The weekend in the Hamptons was cancelled. His career was over. He just didn't know how long it would take for the official execution. Landing at London Heathrow was a surreal experience. For the passengers in economy, it was the end of a routine overnight flight. But for the occupants of the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. The sun was rising, casting long, pale shadows across the tarmac, but a palpable chill remained inside the aircraft. As the plane taxied to the gate, Arthur Kensington's voice came over the intercom, but with a notable change to the standard script. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to arrive at the gate. For our passengers in first class, we ask that you please remain in your seats until a ground representative has boarded the aircraft. Thank you." This was highly unusual. First-class passengers are always the first to deplane. This was a hold, a quarantine. Brenda, who had spent the last hours of the flight performing her duties with the robotic movements of the walking dead, stood by the galley, her face chalk white. She knew who the ground representative was for. As the jet bridge connected with a soft bump, the main cabin door was opened, not by the crew, but from the outside. A man in a sharp, dark suit stepped aboard. He was followed by another woman, also in corporate attire. They were not customs agents or airport staff. They exuded an aura of C-suite authority. They were senior executives from Transatlantic Air's London headquarters. The man whose name was Sir Alan Croft, the airline's chairman, walked directly to seat 1A. He ignored everyone else. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice a low, deferential rumble. "I am Alan Croft. On behalf of the entire board of Transatlantic Air, I must offer you our most humble and sincere apologies. The failure in service you experienced is inexcusable and is being addressed at the very highest level." Evelyn slowly took off her reading glasses and met his gaze. "Sir Alan, thank you for the personal welcome. It was indeed an unfortunate incident. A car is waiting for you on the tarmac to take you directly to your hotel to bypass the main terminal," he continued. "Your luggage will be brought to you by a personal courier. We have also, of course, fully refunded this flight and credited your corporate account with 1 million air miles as a small, wholly inadequate gesture of our regret." Evelyn nodded. These were the expected moves, the corporate damage control playbook. "That is acceptable. My primary concern, however, is not compensation. It is ensuring the operational standards we pay for are met. For everyone. I assure you, Dr. Reed, your concerns have been heard." Sir Alan said, his eyes flicking for a split second towards the galley. "Changes are already being implemented." Evelyn gathered her things and stood up. Sir Alan escorted her personally to the door. As she passed the galley, she saw the other executive speaking quietly but sternly to Arthur the purser. Standing a few feet behind them was Brenda. Her uniform jacket seemed too big for her now, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Her eyes met Evelyn's for a fraction of a second. There was no anger left in them, only a hollow, bottomless despair. Evelyn felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a grim sense of finality. This was the regrettable but necessary cost of failure. Evelyn was led down the jet bridge steps to the tarmac, where a black Jaguar was waiting, its engine purring. The world of normal airport procedures simply didn't apply to her anymore. As the car pulled away, she looked back at the massive Airbus A350. To the world, it was an aircraft. To her, it was now a case study. Back on the plane, the moment Evelyn was clear, the atmosphere shifted. Sir Alan's female colleague, the head of human resources for Europe, walked over to Brenda. "Brenda Miller," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "You will be escorted from the aircraft by airport security. Your credentials are to be surrendered. You are suspended, pending a full investigation. Do not contact any other crew members. A formal hearing will be scheduled. Is that understood?" Brenda could only nod, tears finally welling in her eyes and tracing silent paths down her cheeks. Her career of 27 years was over. It had ended because of a piece of fish and a deep-seated prejudice she had let curdle into a career-ending mistake. Meanwhile, Kyle, the businessman from 2A, was now free to deplane. He walked through the terminal, his mind buzzing. He had just witnessed a masterclass in silent power. He sat down in the arrivals lounge, pulled out his laptop, and began to write. He was a business blogger and had a modest but influential following on LinkedIn. He changed the names to protect himself legally, but the details were all there. The arrogant flight attendant, the calm and powerful black woman, the denied meal, the cryptic message from the cockpit, the airline chairman waiting on the tarmac. He titled the post, "I just watched a woman fire a multi-million-dollar company from 35,000 feet, and it's a lesson in modern power." He hit post. Before his own car had even arrived to pick him up, the post had 100 likes. By lunchtime, it would have 10,000. By the end of the day, it would be the talk of the business world. The story of Flight TA-101 was about to go viral. The hard karma had only just begun. The business world moves at the speed of information. Kyle's LinkedIn post was the spark, and the global financial media was the gasoline. By mid-morning in London, the salmon incident, as it was being called, was trending. Major news outlets like the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and Forbes, smelling a story about corporate power and consequence, began digging. It didn't take them long to connect the dots. Anonymous sources within Transatlantic Air, eager to distance the airline from the catering company, leaked the name Global Fair Airways Catering. Other sources confirmed the identity of the passenger in 1A as the reclusive but powerful Dr. Evelyn Reed of Aurasphere Global. The market reaction was swift and brutal. Global Fair was a publicly traded company. When the markets opened in New York, their stock ticker GFC plummeted. It dropped 15% in the first hour of trading, wiping out over $80 million in market capitalization. The reason cited by analysts was the potential loss of their single largest client contract. For Mark Thompson, the day was a living nightmare. He arrived at his office at 6 a.m. to find his board of directors had convened an emergency call. He was patched in, and for 30 excruciating minutes, he was verbally crucified. He tried to explain it as a minor service issue that could be smoothed over. He was laughed at. "Mark," the lead director said, his voice dripping with contempt, "you didn't just smooth it over. You cost us the transatlantic contract, which accounts for 40% of our annual revenue. You made us a global laughingstock, and you did it by antagonizing a woman who could buy our entire company with her pocket change and not even notice." By 9:35 a.m., just 5 minutes after the NASDAQ opening bell, the board had voted. A press release was issued. Mark Thompson has stepped down as CEO of Global Fair Catering, effective immediately. He wasn't even allowed to go back to his office to collect his things. His belongings would be couriered to him. He was escorted out of the building by security, a man who yesterday was a titan of industry, and today was just another unemployed executive in a suit. The karma, however, was not done with him. As details of his cost-cutting measures on the salmon supply came to light in the internal investigation, it was discovered he had knowingly violated health and safety transport regulations to save a few dollars per kilo. The FDA was notified. Mark Thompson's problems were just beginning. For Brenda Miller, the flight attendant, the fallout was more personal and just as devastating. The airline, in a masterstroke of public relations, offered her up as a sacrifice. They issued a statement condemning the unacceptable and discriminatory behavior of a single employee, and announced she had been terminated. Her name, though officially withheld, was leaked onto aviation forums and social media within hours. Her face was everywhere. She became a meme, the personification of a Karen at 35,000 feet. She had to delete her social media, unplug her phone. The career she had built her life around was gone, and her reputation was permanently destroyed. But the story took another twist. The viral nature of the incident put a spotlight on discriminatory practices in the travel industry. Activist groups and media commentators championed Dr. Reid not just as a powerful CEO, but as a black woman who had refused to tolerate the kind of casual systemic racism that so many experience daily. She had the power to fight back in a way most couldn't, and she had used it. Aurasphere Global, which usually maintained a stoic, silent presence, seized the narrative. Maria Flores, the General Counsel, issued a statement. Aurasphere Global operates on a principle of absolute integrity. The decision to terminate our contract with Global Fare Catering was a business decision prompted by a severe breach of contract and a failure to meet our mandated standards. That said, the circumstances of that failure, which involved the clear mistreatment of our CEO, Dr. Evelyn Reid, are not something we can or will ignore. Our company believes that respect and dignity are not optional line items in a service agreement. We will only partner with companies that share this fundamental belief. As such, we are today announcing a full audit of the diversity, equity, and inclusion policies of all our major global vendors. The statement was a bombshell. It sent a shock-wave through the corporate world. Every company that did business with Aurasphere, hundreds of them, was now on notice. Their DEI policies were about to be scrutinized by one of the most powerful procurement firms on the planet. Dr. Reid hadn't just fired a catering company. She had forced corporate reckoning on a global scale. The ripple effect of that single quiet email was changing the way the world did business. 3 months later, the dust had settled, and the landscape had been irrevocably altered. Global Fare Airways Catering, stripped of its largest contract and facing a shareholder revolt, was forced to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Its assets were being sold off in pieces. The name, once a respectable player in the industry, was now a cautionary tale taught in business schools. Mark Thompson was facing potential federal charges over his supply chain violations, and was a pariah in the corporate world. His Hamptons house was on the market. Brenda Miller, after a period of intense public shame, disappeared from public life. Friends said she had moved to a small town in the Midwest to live with her sister, her life forever, defined by a single prejudice decision. The hard, swift karma had been absolute. Transatlantic Air, having narrowly escaped the disaster, had implemented a sweeping new customer service training program developed in consultation with DEI experts. The purser Arthur Kensington had been promoted to Director of In-Flight Experience, tasked with ensuring an incident like Flight TA-101 never happened again. The airline's new catering contract was awarded to First Fleet Gastronomy, the vendor Evelyn had named in her email. Their service was impeccable. Pan-seared Atlantic salmon was always available, and Dr. Evelyn Reid, she was in the Aurasphere Global Boardroom in New York, a vast space overlooking Central Park. The energy deal in London had been a success. She was now presiding over a meeting to finalize the results of their vendor DEI audit. "The numbers are in," said Daniel Petroff, her COO, pointing to a chart on the main screen. Since the audit was announced, 92% of our primary vendors have actively revised and strengthened their inclusion policies. We've seen a 400% increase in senior management undergoing anti-bias training across our entire supply chain. Evelyn looked at the numbers, a small, satisfied smile touching her lips. She had never wanted public attention. She had not sought to become a symbol, but she had accepted the role when it was thrust upon her. Her quiet, decisive action had been born of personal insult, but it had blossomed into a movement. She had leveraged a moment of disrespect into a force for systemic change. Her executive assistant entered the room and placed a small, polished wooden box on the table in front of her. "This was delivered by courier Dr. Reed. It's from Kyle Peterson." Evelyn recognized the name, the blogger from the flight. She opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a beautifully crafted silver fountain pen. A small engraved card was with it. It read, "Dr. Reed. I witnessed what happened on that flight. I thought it was a story about power. I now realize it was a story about standards. Thank you for raising them for everyone. Kyle." Evelyn held the pen. It was heavy-balanced, a tool for writing, for signing contracts, for creating new realities. She thought back to that flight, to the cold look in Brenda's eyes, and the plate of congealed risotto. She had refused to accept the substandard. In doing so, she had created a new standard, not just for herself, but for countless others. The world still saw her as a powerful, reclusive CEO, a force of nature in the corporate world. But as she sat there in the quiet of her boardroom, she knew the truth. Power wasn't about firing people or moving markets. It was about having a clear, unshakable set of principles and the courage to enforce them, whether it was in a multi-billion-dollar negotiation or in a quiet war of wills over a first-class meal at 35,000 feet. And in that, she was just getting started. The legend of Flight TA-101 became a ghost story told in corporate boardrooms. It was a whispered warning about the hidden power that sits in every premium cabin, a testament to how quickly a billion-dollar empire could be jeopardized by a $10 meal. For most, the story ended with the bankruptcy of global fare and the public shaming of a flight attendant. But for Dr. Evelyn Reed, it was only the beginning. The incident had not created her principles, but it had given them a global stage, and she had no intention of letting the spotlight go to waste. 3 months after the flight, Evelyn sat at the head of her vast obsidian boardroom table. On the holographic screen that dominated the far wall, the face of Julian Vance, the CEO of the Crestwood Collection, one of the world's most prestigious luxury hotel chains, appeared. Vance was a man accustomed to deference with a silver mane and a smile that had graced the covers of travel magazines. Today that smile was gone, replaced by a strained, defensive posture. "Dr. Reed, or..." Julian began, his voice a little too loud for the microphone. "I want to assure you the results of your audit have my full and undivided attention. We at Crestwood have always prided ourselves on a culture of inclusivity." Daniel Petrov, sitting to Evelyn's right, subtly slid a tablet across the table. On it were the key findings of the Aurasphere audit into Crestwood's corporate practices, a 98% white male executive board, documented pay disparities between employees of different races in equivalent roles, and dozens of guest complaints related to racial profiling at their flagship properties, all of which had been dismissed by management as customer misunderstandings. Evelyn looked at Julian, her expression unreadable. She hadn't summoned him for a fight. She had summoned him for a reprogramming. "Julian," she said, her voice calm and even. "Pride is an emotion. I am interested in data. Your data suggests that Crestwood's culture of inclusivity is a marketing slogan, not an operational reality. My company, Aurasphere Global, spends over $30 million a year across your properties. Our executives, our clients, our partners, they stay in your hotels. When they do, they are an extension of my brand. And I will not have my brand associated with a partner whose internal culture is fundamentally misaligned with our own. Julian's face tightened. This was the moment he expected the axe to fall. Evelyn, we have been partners for a decade, and that is why you are not being terminated. She cut in her words, sharp and precise. You are being given a chance to evolve. In your inbox, you will find a document titled the Aurasphere Partnership Mandate. It is a performance improvement plan. It outlines specific, non-negotiable targets for executive and managerial diversification, pay equity audits, and a complete overhaul of your guest relations and staff training protocols. You have 6 months to demonstrate meaningful, measurable progress. A team from Aurasphere will be embedded with your HR and operations departments to assist and to verify. She paused, letting the weight of her decree settle in. We are not asking you to change, Julian. We are telling you that the continuation of our 9-figure procurement contract is contingent upon it. It wasn't an execution, it was a corporate annexation. She wasn't just firing him, she was rebuilding his company's ethos from the inside out. Julian Vance, a man who considered himself a king in his industry, was being told to fundamentally change the way he ruled his kingdom or be cast out into the wilderness. He looked at Evelyn's calm, determined face on the screen, and he knew he had no choice. The ghost of Global Fair Catering was in the room with them. We will, of course, cooperate fully, Evelyn, he finally stammered. Thank you for the opportunity. The call ended. Daniel Petrov let out a low whistle. He looked like he was going to swallow his own tongue. I've never seen you this relentless about vendor relations. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sprawling green expanse of Central Park. The city bustled below, a complex machine of commerce and human ambition. For a moment, she wasn't seeing the New York of today, but the New York of 20 years ago. The memory was sharp, undimmed by time. She was 26 years old, a junior analyst at a prestigious but brutally old-fashioned Wall Street firm. She was the only black person and the only woman on her mergers and acquisitions team. She was brilliant, driven, and utterly invisible to the men who ran the floor. Her boss, a portly, condescending man named Abernathy, had taken the team out for a celebratory dinner at a stuffy, Michelin-starred restaurant where the waiters wore tuxedos and the wine list was thicker than a dictionary. It was a crucial night for her. She had done the lion's share of the work on the deal they were celebrating, and she hoped for a crumb of recognition. The humiliation came not as a storm, but as a slow, corrosive acid. The waiter, a sneering man with a pencil mustache, took the orders from the men, first pointedly skipping over her. When Abernathy ordered a bottle of expensive Bordeaux, the waiter poured a taste for him to approve, then went around the table, serving every man before finally, almost as an afterthought, splashing a small amount into Evelyn's glass without even looking at her. Later, when she asked a question about the menu, the waiter smirked and said, "The simpler dishes are on the left side, dear." Evelyn felt a hot flush of rage and shame. She looked at Abernathy, hoping for a sign of support, a quiet word to the waiter. Instead, she saw him share a subtle, knowing smirk with the client across the table. In that instant, she understood. To them, her humiliation was a trivial, even amusing part of the evening's entertainment. She was not a colleague, she was a token, and her discomfort was less important than the smooth, uninterrupted flow of their self-congratulation. She said nothing. To complain would be to be labeled the angry black woman, to be seen as not a team player, to have her career kneecapped before it even began. So she sat in silence, her food tasteless in her mouth, the laughter around her a dull, meaningless roar. She endured, walking home that night through the cold, empty canyons of the financial district. She made a vow. It was a quiet promise made to the determined young woman, reflected in the dark glass of the skyscrapers. Never again, she told herself. I will never again be in a room where I am powerless to command respect. I will not just build a seat at the table. I will build the damn table. And the rules at my table will be different. A voice pulled her back to the present. Evelyn. Daniel was looking at her, a concerned expression on his face. Are you all right? She turned from the window, the ghost of the memory receding, leaving only the iron resolve it had forged. On her desk, the silver fountain pen from Kyle Peterson caught the light. It was a symbol of her present power, a power she had earned to protect the younger version of herself, who had none. I'm fine, Daniel, she said, her voice clear and strong. I was just thinking that a company's culture is like a flight. It doesn't matter how luxurious the cabin is if the crew is determined to make someone feel like they don't belong. We're not just auditing vendors anymore. We're setting flight plans. So what's the real lesson here? It's easy to see this as a simple story of revenge of a corporate titan swatting away a fly. But it's so much more than that. It's a story about hidden power structures and the quiet dignity that refuses to be diminished. Dr. Evelyn Reed didn't shout, she didn't make a scene. She simply used the tools she had built to enforce a standard of respect that should be universal. Her story is a powerful reminder that the biggest changes often start with the smallest moments of intolerance, the moment we decide, no, this is not acceptable. It shows us that true power isn't just about wealth. It's about the conviction to act when you see something wrong. What did you think of Brenda's fate? Was the karma too harsh, or was it exactly what she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of justice and unbelievable real-life drama.